to another Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. It's beautiful out these windows here at the grill room of the St. Francis Yacht Club. And right off the bat, we get to introduce now, how many people can say this? Our Commodore, who just bicycled in from Marin County in Larkspur. Now, I live in Mill Valley, the next town over, and I'm thinking that he just rode about, 16 miles or so. Our Commodore, a genuine sailor, Paul Heineken.
Welcome, everybody. I didn't think I was going to make it with the tourist traffic on the bridge. I was dodging and weaving, and I told Ron I'd be here 10 minutes ago. And then a quick change in the locker room. So, welcome for a wonderful opportunity again to listen to a great speaker. Welcome to everybody online, everybody in the club, and everybody who's going to look at this in the future. My job is to tell you what's been going on around the club. And obviously, a lot of people are going up to Tinsley Island for a big 4th of July weekend, starting whenever they can get out today. But last weekend, we sent a women's-only team to American Yacht Club in New York for a team race, 3-on-3 team race, and our girls prevailed. It came down to the last race, and they had to win it, and they won it. So they came home as champions again. So thanks to our Great Challenges program here at the club, our J22 program, and our great sailors. So with that, oh, and one more thing, Mr. Beaumont. We appreciate what you're doing. I know you're an artist. I've read a lot of Samuel Eliot Morison in my day, who is the World War II naval historian. So I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. Wonderful. Let's see. A little bit about future speakers. In October, you'll get to come by and listen to Anna Marie Schulte. Second here, one. There we go. Anna Marie Schulte, who's written a book called Sparrowhawk on the Horizon. Incredibly cool story about the America's Cup. When they said Sparrowhawk on the Horizon, what boat might they have been talking about? She might have been talking about the schooner, the black schooner America. Sparrowhawk on the Horizon. Then, of course, we're going to have Aaron Wangenham come by in October the 2nd and talk about the Delta Ditch Run. I did it this year. The Delta Ditch Run is a one-way race. You go that way, go east, downwind. We jibed 144 times getting from here to Stockton. In September, on the 25th, Michael Brodsky will be here. He was the lawyer who helped win the battle to keep big giant tunnels from sucking water up and bypassing it bypassing our delta, sucking water above Tinsley and bypassing it to Southern California. Then on September 18th, Mort Beebe, just back from China, will be here to talk all about the incredible battle between Hong Kong's independence movement and the giant country of China. Susan Rooney will talk about the Big Boat series with our own Graham Beale in September at the time of the Big Boat. And then we'll have Brandon Southwall come and talk to us about ships hitting whales. They do. It's not cool, but the ships do other damage. The sound is used in sonar in ships as damaging whales' hearing. In August, come by and you'll hear the making of a bar pilot. Think about the bar pilots. Do they still jump from the bar pilot boat onto the boat they're going to pilot? You'll hear all about that. The answer is yes. And then the Delta Coalition that basically, from the government perspective, Save the Delta, will have Kathy Miller and Don Natole come by and talk to us all about them essentially saving the Delta. In the end of July, Stan Honey will be here to talk all about the new double-handed mixed crew offshore event for the 2024 Olympics. On July 17th, Jennifer Bushman will be here to talk all about the life of being a surfer and how those people are turning into environmentalists automatically because their playground is being polluted. And next week, Matt Larson, PhD, will be here to talk all about big whales and bigger ships. Another story about what can happen when you put the two too close together. Now, a little bit about our speaker today. So one of the joys of chairing this this is my 700 and something Wednesday yachting luncheon to chair, literally, is that you get to meet really, really cool, fun people and their friends. And our speaker today is one such case. I got to know the son of the artist, our speaker today, Geoffrey Beaumont, a couple years ago. And imagine being a little boy and you're 5 years of age and you're taking a steamer, the SS Catalina, across from Long Beach to Catalina, and all these people are paying attention to your dad because he's an artist. He's been the official famous artist of the U.S. Navy. Everywhere he goes, people know all about his dad. At 12 years of age, sailing out of Balboa Harbor, he's racing snowboards, but still his dad is this amazingly famous guy. He goes off to Andover, in Massachusetts, goes to school out there. Everywhere he goes, people talk about his dad. He comes back, goes to Stanford, gets a degree in history, becomes a Navy midshipman, where he spent 7.5 years with the crew in the Navy, a success-prone lad, sails on the Yorktown, which is an aircraft carrier, sails on the Wisconsin, which is a battleship, gets assigned to the destroyer, essentially constantly thinking about the U.S. English, the destroyer, always thinking about his dad, has painted boats like this, ships like this, for years. So he spends a good time in the Navy. Then he comes out, goes back to Stanfordia, gets all JD there, and goes into practice as an investment banker, and spends a career at Dean Witter, and then starts his own firm, and ultimately retires to write a book about what? His father's great adventure as the U.S. Navy artist. So he's actually lived his whole life about what he's going to talk about right now, because from the time he was a little kid, people were looking admiringly at his father, who was literally the official Navy artist of the United States Navy in World War II. So with that, my buddy, and he's brought his guest, John Gibson. We won't hold the fact that he's a lawyer against him at all. John, nice to have you visiting as well. Give us a wave, John. There we go. And the Beaumont table floweth over with other guests. And with that, my friend and the speaker today, Geoffrey Beaumont. Geoffrey.
It's a pleasure to be back speaking at St. Francis Yacht Club. 2 years ago, I was here as your guest, and Ron was a great host. And it's a pleasure for me to repeat this, but I'm going to say some different things this time. And we're going to start with an introductory film, if they're ready for it. Let's go to it. We'll need to darken the room if it's possible. It'll play.
The siren call of the sea. A deep sense of history, of destiny, of adventure. The power and might of the ships of the United States Navy. An overwhelming need to act, to fulfill, to create, to capture forever. What brought Arthur Edwin Beaumont to his life's work? What forces compelled him to paint, to record a time unrivaled in naval history? Arthur Beaumont loved his work, and his work remains unchanged by the ravages of time, filled with spirit, which will live as long as men and women go down to the sea. Arthur Beaumont's specialty was marine and naval painting. During his life, he produced hundreds of exquisite watercolors. Only classified details are missing from his works. Painstaking accuracy was the guide as Arthur Beaumont sketched his chosen subject first in pencil and then watercolor. Sketches which note the smallest detail were never altered, once complete. Whenever possible, he sailed the ships he painted, always watching, recording the action of the waves against the ship.
We now work on the sea. Here is where experience, study, and observation is invaluable, and this I actually do at sea, watching the furious action of storms or the placid calms, observing water churned by the propellers or dashing casually aside by the knife-edged bow of a destroyer, noting the difference of the action when a ship heaves its bow up from a wave and when it plunges down again, tossing spray and spume all over the deck.
Arthur Beaumont was anything but an amateur. Leaving his native England behind, he began a lifetime of adventure. He rode the range as a cowboy in the Great West, sketching every aspect of ranch life. This work appears in his early impressionistic paintings. Moving to Los Angeles during the First World War, Arthur Beaumont opened his first commercial art studio. He opened the door to a career which would mark his place in history. Here he met and later married the beautiful Dorothy Dean, beginning a family which he always cherished and enjoyed. He studied with established painters in Los Angeles, London, and Paris. But it was the 1933 exhibit, Our Glorious Navy, which first established his reputation as an important American artist.
The first show, the one that gained all the attention, circulated the country between 1933 and 34. It was a show that he put together himself, and the name of the show was Our Glorious Navy. You know, this was 1933, 1934. We're still in a period where World War II is a little bit off, you know, years off, and the United States has kind of an isolationist policy. But there was a lot of controversy at the time over that. In all probability, a lot of people in government were very pleased with an exhibition like this that stirred up a little patriotism.
Beaumont, why aren't you in the Navy? The question Admiral William Leahy asked while sitting for his portrait began a professional bond and a friendship which lasted nearly half a century. Beau, as his friends called him, did join the Navy as a lieutenant and was her only artist until World War II. His record of U.S. warships is remarkable in both depth and scope. No other artist has ever recorded with such detail and imagination this incredible number of sailing vessels. The significance of the National Geographic series, which Beaumont painted in 1941, was heightened by the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor 3 months after publication. Many of the ships Beaumont had painted in the previous 10 years were destroyed or badly damaged in the attack. Never the reclusive painter, Arthur Beaumont's long list of accomplishments tells the tale of a bold and daring adventurer as well. A man of action, an artist on location, a faithful patriot. When the Navy was called to action, Beau was there. In fact, One of the reasons he worked in watercolors was their speed and portability. Before America entered World War II, Beau gave the American public a view of the sea battles which raged in Europe. He would work all night to paint black and white newspaper illustrations for the Hearst Syndicate. The next day, these paintings were reproduced in many American dailies throughout the country. They helped everyone see the need for American participation in the war. Tireless in the war effort, Beaumont helped raise over $80 million in Southern California. This money built ships, the USS Los Angeles, and 4 destroyers.
There are quite a few paintings of the USS Los Angeles. He did an oil painting, which unfortunately was stolen. It was in the City Hall of the city, in the city of Los Angeles, and someone literally cut it out of the frame, which is quite fascinating, because it's, to our knowledge, never come up on the market to be sold, so it was obviously someone who just wanted it, who coveted it, which is kind of typical of what stolen artwork is. It's usually stolen for, is just to keep.
Bikini Atoll, 1945. Arthur Beaumont tied his small barge to a buoy some 12 miles from ground zero. The heavens shook, the sky burned, and Beau painted. 4 hours he painted. 180 sketches, 16 paintings, including 2 watercolors of the mushroom cloud, and 1 of the sinking of the USS Saratoga. Photographs were not allowed. Beau recorded the event. After the war, with time to relax, Beaumont cruised aboard the USS St. Paul to Japan and China. Here was an artist's paradise, he remarked. The influence of that trip to the Far East stayed with him for the rest of his life. Fascinated by Chinese junks and pagodas, Beaumont's style developed a new Oriental flavor. In fact, some of Arthur Beaumont's best work comes from this period. While in Beijing, he walked the halls of the Forbidden City only days before the People's Army led by Mao Zedong entered that historical capital. Retirement was impossible for our man of adventure. In 1957, Beau signed on the USS El Dorado. Sailing more than 30,000 miles, he painted and sketched Arctic territory firsthand. Beau made history on that voyage. He was aboard the first ship to traverse the Northwest Passage. He was also the first artist to see and paint the Bellot Strait. Nearly 70 years of age, Arthur Beaumont heard yet another call of the sea. He wrote, "Antarctica is fantastic, indescribable, unpredictable, inexplorable, and ruthless, yet hauntingly beautiful. It is alone, apart, defiant, and awesome." Beau completed 350 sketches and 25 paintings in 2 visits to the frozen continent. He became the first human ever to paint the South Pole, using torpedo alcohol to thin the paint in a minus 70-degree heat wave. Surviving the Antarctic is a feat in itself. While exploring, Beau fell into an ice crevasse and dangled 10 feet above the deadly freezing water. A friend saved his life, but the effort badly pulled Beau's painting arm. Beau responded by learning to paint left-handed. Perhaps it was to be expected that Beaumont's finest award came from the Navy. In 1964, he was awarded the most prestigious civilian award the Navy can offer, the Meritorious Public Service Citation. He wrote, "Please accept my sincere and heartfelt thanks for this great honor, which I treasure above all other commendations." In 1978, Arthur Edwin Beaumont passed from this world, leaving perhaps the finest body of paintings ever to capture the spirit of the sea and the ships that sailed her. Arthur Beaumont's constant sense of adventure and his love of ships and the sea was his life and is now his legacy.
Well, some of that is a bit repetitive, what I'm about to speak about, but it'll give you a good introduction, I think. This portrait of my dad was done when he was nominated as Associate of the National Academy of Art. And one of the requirements that they have is that there must be a portrait of the artist in their collection. So that's when this was done. But going back in time, my dad was born in England, in Norwich, in 1890. He went to private schools in England, and this is a picture of him when he graduated at the age of 18. And he has a dilemma because he realizes he is not of the class that will allow him to go to university at Oxford or Cambridge. And so he decides that he's going to leave for the United States. His uncle, 4 years older, had gone to California, and it was writing him letters saying, the university is free, it's very good quality, and the weather is better. Now, my uncle also was on campus at Berkeley during the 1906 earthquake. So he had some other duties. He was an engineering student, and he was one of the people who evaluated the structural integrity of the buildings on campus, which were better built than most and were being used as refugee centers for people coming from the city by ferry boat to Berkeley and Oakland. So my dad decides to follow his brother's footsteps, but he has to earn his way. So he had been in the cavalry corps of the British Army Reserves. He was a good horseman, and when he came to California, he to finance his living expenses while studying at Berkeley. He was an art student at Berkeley, at the Mark Hopkins Institute of Art. And that's in 1909. In 1910, he runs out of money, so he gets a job on the Miller and Lux Ranch in the Central Valley and becomes a cowboy. So here he is. He's a bit of a dandy, but here he is as a cowboy. And this is a formal cowboy portrait. But in any case, he's 22 years old at this time, and he's working on the Miller and Lux Ranch. And as a fence rider, and then later on as a superintendent, he interdicted an Italian gang that was stealing cattle from the ranch. He brought in the sheriff. He testified against them in court. They were convicted. They went to prison, and their family members declared a vendetta against him. Not very much after that, the family members cornered him and beat him severely and almost killed him. Some ranch hands from the Miller and Lux saved his life, but he had to have brain surgery here in San Francisco at the German hospital in 1910. He recovered from that slowly and went back to the ranch, and when he was there, people were still shooting at him. So he told the sheriff that this was happening, and the sheriff said, "Young man, you better get out of town and change your name." Now, his family name before that was Crabbe. That's when he became Arthur Beaumont. And he moved to Los Angeles, and he met my mother. But in the meantime, his early paintings were Western paintings. This is an oil, and that's a self-portrait. When he gets to Los Angeles in 1915, during World War I, he didn't have to, because he was of English birth, he did not have to volunteer for the American Army, but he tried to volunteer for the British Army through the Canadian Army, and they would not accept him because of his injuries that he'd suffered by the cattle rustlers. So here's my mom when she was 17 when he first met her, and she was very instrumental in the success of his career. My mom was the first valedictorian from UCLA. She was the first Phi Beta Kappa from UCLA, and when she graduated, they hired her as Assistant Dean of Women. This became very important later on in my dad's career because she got him some of his early commissions. So he opened his own studio in 1929 after he'd been teaching at the Chouinard Art Institute. And but I'm jumping ahead a little bit. When he enrolled in Chouinard, Mrs. Chouinard picked him as one of the most promising students, along with Millard Sheets. And she got him a fellowship to go back and study at the University of London, Slade School of Art. He went back to England, studied there, and then he went to Paris and he studied at the Académie Julienne. This is a drawing he did of the entryway of the Académie Julienne in Paris. And this is shows him at Notre Dame, which looks a little bit different than that today, I think, unfortunately. And he was painting when he graduated from Académie Julienne in the French style. So here we have, this is an oil painting of my sister called Little Mother. It was a prize-winning painting. And she was 7 years old, and she is holding a toy, a doll, pretending to be the mom as a 7-year-old. These were the types of California Impressionist paintings he was doing before his entry into the Navy. This is Arroyo Seco in Pasadena area. These are the high Sierras. And in 1929, he opened his own studio in Los Angeles. It was August of 29. 2 months later, the stock market crashes, wipes out the art market, and in 1930, he's unemployed. But my mom is Assistant Dean of Women at UCLA, so she's the bridge that keeps the family going during this period of time. And she tries to get him commissions so he can make some money because the art market is just dead. And she was a devout Episcopalian. She knew the bishop and the bishop's wife, and she got my father the commission to do an oil painting for an altarpiece for the St. Thomas Church in Point Hope, Alaska. The Diocese of Los Angeles was a sponsor and had a mission church in the Inuit community of Point Hope, and he painted this painting of Christ with St. Thomas. This is the only religious painting that I know of that he did, but it's Christ with St. Thomas, and it's painted in the style of George de la Tour with interior luminosity. It's quite a remarkable oil. I have gone up to Point Hope to see this painting and photograph it in the Arctic Circle. At the same time, he was painting, just to try and earn some money. He was giving art lessons in the harbor in Long Beach, in San Pedro, and he loved fishing boats. And you'll see he painted a whole series of fishing boats. But if you look at the water treatment here, it's very impressionistic, very modernistic. And he would create his drama for his paintings. They're not photographs. He wants you to know they're paintings through the large seas, the emotion you can see, you feel it, and through the colorations of his works. So in 1931, he's appointed my mom gets him the job as the art director for UCLA Publications. And in 1931, it's announced that UCLA will be a sponsor of the 1932 Olympics. And so he gets the commission to do the Olympic posters for 1932. And there are 9 of these. You'll find these in the UCLA yearbook, and you'll find they were in posters all over the city at the time. But he painted one poster for each of the cities that had hosted the Olympics between 1896, when they started in Athens, and 1932, when they ended up in Los Angeles. So right after this time, he also gave an exhibit in Long Beach of his watercolors, mostly the impressionistic paintings, the harbor paintings. He's not yet done any Navy paintings, but there is a captain of the USS Arkansas, one of the old battleships, who's an art collector, who comes to the exhibit and who asks him, would he paint a portrait of the captain? So here we have Beau in the captain's cabin on board the Arkansas with the captain in full uniform, and he is doing his portrait. All of his portraits he did through sittings. He did not use photographs, and he got to know his subjects very well. So Captain Percy Foote introduced him to Admiral William Leahy. You may know there's a new book just on the market in the last month called The Second Most Powerful Man in the World, Admiral William Leahy. Leahy was Roosevelt's senior military advisor and was the first 5-star rank general officer, or naval officer in this case. His rank was higher than Eisenhower and Marshall and Nimitz and all the others. He was number 1, and he became the first 5-star admiral. But he was also, so here's a sketch that he did sitting for this portrait. This is the portrait he did of Leahy when he was chief of naval operations. So in the night, going back to, while sitting for his portrait, Leahy asks him, "Would you like to be the artist for the Navy?" And that's a job offer in 1932. And he said, "Yes, I'll take that job." So for the next 47 years, he was the artist for the Navy. But in the first 2 years, he was active duty as a lieutenant. Leahy got him a commission, and he went to sea and painted all the capital ships of the Navy in both fleets. At that time, there was only one fleet, but the fleet would go back and forth between the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. So here's a picture of him on board the Indianapolis in his lieutenant's uniform. And here's a picture of him doing his sketch of the Indianapolis. He did everything plein air, did not work from photographs. The only time he worked from photographs was if he was doing a picture of a foreign ship that he had not seen. But all the capital ships of the United States he had seen, and this is the type of a working drawing that would come from that. In 1934, the captain of the USS Indianapolis, that's Roosevelt's flagship at that time, is going to go for, the ship is going to be the flagship at the Naval Review in New York Harbor. And my dad asked Admiral Leahy for permission to join in that event. And the Admiral says, "We have too many politicians who want to be near the president on board that day. I can't give you permission to do that." So the captain of the ship had commissioned him to do a painting of the Indianapolis alongside of Roosevelt's yacht, the Amberjack. Roosevelt had several yachts, but this was the Amberjack. And this painting was to be given to the president on board at the Fleet Review. So he arranged for the captain of the ship to come to Washington, to the Army-Navy Club, to pick up the painting to take back to New York to have it on board when the president would arrive. So the captain then said, "Are you coming up to New York?" And my dad said, "I don't have orders to do that. I've been told I cannot." And the captain said, "Well, I'm going to make you my assistant. I'm going to write you the orders, and you come up." So he goes to New York, and his assignment is to take care of a very distinguished guest, and that guest is Fiorello LaGuardia. And Fiorello was the mayor of New York. He was very popular. He was kind of short and rotund. And when Fiorello goes up, or my dad takes him up to the bridge where he's going to watch the Fleet Review, he is so short he cannot see over the bulkhead. So my dad races down to the galley and gets some crates that were used for food, brings them up, stacks them up, and lifts the mayor on top of the stacks so he can see out and see the Fleet Review. Shortly after that, my dad hears his name called over the 1MC, Arthur Beaumont, Lieutenant Beaumont, report to the quarterdeck. So he goes to the quarterdeck, the captain's waiting for him, and the captain takes him into the admiral's cabin, and there is Franklin Roosevelt with his son on his wheelchair, the only ones in the room, and my dad has a 20-minute conversation as the painting of the Indianapolis is presented to the president. And here's the Indianapolis, and that's the Amberjack. And this painting, we thought, went down with the Indianapolis. It's a very ill-fated ship in later years. You may know it carried the atomic bomb to Kwajalein from Oakland. And shortly after that, it delivered the bomb. It was cruising its normal speed, and it was torpedoed and sunk, and many men went in the water. Because it was such a secret mission, there was no search, because the admirals in the area did not know the ship was there. It was a very secret mission. So it's a very tragic case. But we thought that this painting went down with the ship. But in fact, it was taken off the ship and went into the admiral's quarters in Hawaii at the submarine base. And 40 years later, I found this painting in the admiral's office. So it's been resurrected. It's now on the Navy inventories. He also went on to paint other very distinguished officers. This is Colonel Underwood, who later on became a lieutenant general. And he would do his own portrait from time to time, just to sort of document his life. Not very often, but once in a while. In 1933, the Constitution from Boston came to the West Coast for the only time. Here it is in a fleet review in Long Beach Harbor, and my father did a whole series of paintings of the Constitution at that time. But shortly after being in Long Beach for 6 months, it came to San Francisco. And my father had done a painting, a large oil painting of the Constitution, and he was going to deliver it to the retiring Secretary of the Navy. This delivery occurred in San Francisco Bay, on board the Constitution, and you can see the mayor of the city in a top hat in the background. Kind of an unusual painting. 1933, at the same time, he had an exhibit at Gump's, at the Gump's Gallery, which you would all be aware of. They used to have a lot of art exhibits there. So they went on to start painting the Navy. You can see here one of the earliest paintings is the Saratoga launching biplanes. That's very early on in naval aviation. But he painted all the ships of the Navy of that period. This is the Ranger coming through the Panama Canal. Very unusual composition here because you basically have a jungle scene with an aircraft carrier. That's pretty unusual. He also did recruiting posters for the Navy. Here you have Teddy Roosevelt with a battleship behind him and talking about the father of the modern Navy. Of course, Teddy Roosevelt originated the Great White Fleet. In the painting he was always looking for drama. So here you have scout planes from a battleship that are seaplanes diving down on the battleship below. These planes, there was no radar in those days, so these planes would be launched by catapult off the battleship. They would go out and they'd scout 100, 200 miles ahead of the fleet looking for the enemy or looking for the opposition. And then when they would come back, they would dive and they would land, and a crane would lift them back on board the battleship. Now, in 1934, my dad realized that if he continued in the Navy as a paid employee, if you will, all the paintings belonged to the Navy. So he resigned his commission, and he became a member of the Naval Guard, California Naval Guard, which was a reserve unit. And as such, he became freelance, and he owned his own paintings. After that, for the rest of his career, he would barter with the Navy for, I'll give you this many paintings if you let me go on that expedition, but the rest of them I get to keep, because he was getting many commissions from captains and admirals who wanted pictures of their ships. And in total, he painted more than 1,000 paintings over the 47 years, the largest body of naval art that exists in the history of the U.S. Navy. But in 1934, he also met John Ford, the movie producer, who was a member of the California Naval Guard. And so he had a little sort of a side movie career. Ford introduced him to a producer who was doing a movie called Mutiny on the Bounty. And in 1935, here is Beau on the right, Edith Head in the center, and Clark Gable on the left. And that is on the deck of the Bounty. So that was, and he went on to do a number of films. But this is what he's painting that time. These are the ship portraits. Here you have the battleship New Mexico, you have the Oklahoma, and you have here the Arizona. And in the late 1930s, he painted all these ships, hundreds of paintings. In the late 1930s, when the war breaks out in Europe, and the Germans invade Poland, the Hearst Syndicate of newspapers does not have any images to go with the stories that are coming in. So my dad had met Marion Davies through John Ford, and my dad was part of the circle that would go up to San Simeon in its heyday, and got to know William Randolph Hearst, who then hired him as chief illustrator for the Hearst Syndicate of newspapers. So for the next 2.5 years, he is painting the European battles primarily. Here you have two German ships having just attacked, a freighter in the background. And here you have an original ink painting of the Hood. The Hood was sunk by the Bismarck, and this is the Hood departing from the Prince of Wales. This is painted before the Hood was sunk. And later on, he also did the sinking of the Graf Spee, the sinking of the Bismarck, and the sinking of the Tirpitz. In 1941, we're now getting close to the war, the National Geographic hires him to do a Navy series, and these became his most famous paintings, one of which on the cover of my book here is from this series. But he did the destroyers, he did the seaplanes, more destroyers. Oh, I had that wrong. That's a cruiser. It's a heavy cruiser, seaplanes, there's the destroyers, auxiliary vessels, submarines, aircraft carriers, and battleships. So these paintings were published in the National Geographic in September of 1941. 3 months later, everybody used to save their National Geographics in those days. Every garage had a, I don't know how it was, but everyone agrees that's what happened. And so people still had this magazine on hand when the attack on Pearl Harbor came. They could go back and see some of the ships were sunk. This ship was one of the ones that was sunk in New Mexico. At the same time, the National Geographic hired my dad to do an Army series. So the week of Pearl Harbor, my dad was actually on Army maneuvers. The Navy paintings had already been published. He's on Army maneuvers in Virginia and South Carolina, North Carolina, and he's with Eisenhower and Patton. And Patton was a big patron of his. Patton had a great sense of history, and Patton arranged for the Army to make him the offer to be the exclusive artist for the Army when he was already the exclusive artist for the Navy. So you had a little inter-service rivalry going on, which was kind of nice. My dad wrote a letter to my mom, which I have, December 6, 1941, and it has on steamship stationery. He's on a steamship going from Norfolk, Virginia to Washington, D.C. to deliver his Army drawings to the National Geographic. And in that letter, he says to my mom, the Army's made me a really good offer. The Navy, I'm a lieutenant, but the Army's going to make me a major and then promote me to colonel. I'll be a senior officer. And what do you think? Well, she didn't answer that question. And 2 days later, the next day is Pearl Harbor. He's in Washington, D.C. the day of Pearl Harbor. And 2 days after that, he goes to visit an old friend of his whose name is Chester Nimitz. And Chester Nimitz's wife was an art student of his. And he tells Chester Nimitz is packing up. He's just been appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific. And he's going to leave Washington and go to Pearl Harbor. And Nimitz says, you are Navy and you should stay Navy. So Beau finished his Army series, which was very well received, published in 1942, but that's the last Army series he did. And these are all plein air. There he is in Army with a helmet on, because there were live action maneuvers going on. And these are the typical of the types of sketches he would do, the Army equipment. And he also did all the branches of the Army. Here they are, the ski troops up by June Lake. So you get soldiers in the foreground, and you get a wonderful Sierra scene in the background. Here is an image that he did in 1942 for the movie Wake Island. And here you see a Marine Corps plane diving on a Japanese cruiser. Now, this was not a successful event because Wake Island was captured by the Japanese. But we decided to retaliate for Pearl Harbor by a very innovative attack led by Jimmy Doolittle. Jimmy Doolittle took Army bombers, put them on board a Navy aircraft carrier. Now, the bombers were very large and could only take off. They could not land. So the bombers were going to leave the carrier, drop bombs on Tokyo, and then fly to China. And they were discovered a little bit prematurely, so they had to launch with really not quite enough fuel on board. It was a very dangerous mission, and some of the pilots didn't make it. But here we have the Hornet launching the Doolittle raid. And here we have a picture. This was top secret at the time, but it showed the Doolittle bombers on board that ship. Now, I'll back up one. This painting is an original and was classified top secret at the time that it was done. This painting is in the wardroom next door to us. We have 12 original paintings there. Go and take a look at it. But John Gibson's is sitting at this table. It's in his collection, and it is stamped top secret on the back. Isn't that right, John? Okay. Anyway, in 1943, Beau was involved with helping the Navy raise money through war bond sales. So he did lithographs that were sold and given to either he hand-signed them. They had one value. The printed ones have a lower value, but they were given out to people who bought war bonds. And he raised $81 million in 1942, which is quite a sum. And the Navy was so delighted with that, they were going to build a light cruiser, and instead they built a heavy cruiser and 4 destroyers on top of that. And these were some of the billboards for that campaign. During the war years, he's painting battle scenes. So here you have a Baltimore-class cruiser being attacked by kamikaze planes. And he did all types of wartime scenes. So here you have an auxiliary ship with camouflage and landing craft in the foreground. You have Jeep aircraft carriers in the North Atlantic. You have destroyers, always with vigorous seas. I'm glad he did that too, because the next ship, this ship, is the USS English. And this was commissioned in 1944 and saw action in World War II. But 15 years later, I was on board this ship as a communications officer. And I told my dad I was seasick for nearly 2 years in the North Atlantic, and I wanted vigorous seas on my painting. And that's the vigorous sea right there. It's a pretty good one. I love that painting. More wartime paintings. Here's a painting he did for Arleigh Burke. Arleigh Burke was one of our most famous admirals. This is called Little Beavers. And here's the first supercarrier, the USS Midway, which is now in San Diego Bay as a museum. He spent the last day of the war on the shakedown cruise of the USS Midway and did this series of paintings. After the war, he continued to paint Navy paintings, but in 1946, the Navy had not known about the atomic bomb, and they realized that the entire Navy was vulnerable to it, and they needed to have a test. So they gathered together an old fleet and 40,000 men and 100 nurses, only 100 women there, in Bikini Island, and they had the Bikini atomic bomb tests. He was the official artist for these tests and was the first artist to view and paint the atomic bomb. In the process of doing these paintings, he got overdosed with radioactivity and had to be treated for that. So here's an original painting of the atomic bomb. You've seen this in the clip that you saw previously. And here he is. You can see how exposed he was. It was about 115 degrees at Bikini at that time. And he was still doing plein air paintings, so he had to have a lot of water with him. And here's a whole series of this particular series of paintings was shown by the Navy at the National Gallery, the second time that a Navy artist had a one-man show at the National Gallery. The first show by the Navy at the National Gallery was also by my dad, but it was in 1934. It was called Our Glorious Navy. These are the Bikini paintings. These are in the Navy collection in Washington. That is the Japanese battleship Nagato sinking. The Nagato was the flagship of Admiral Yamamoto when he attacked Pearl Harbor, and we sank it at Bikini. This is the skate showing the damage the submarine suffered, and this the dramatic sinking of the Saratoga. It's amazing. There are very few paintings like this in the Navy arcades. After the war, he went to China. You saw that in the flick, and his paintings had a totally different feel to them. The palettes changed. He always loved the red sails of the Chinese junks, and he painted a whole series of these paintings after the war. Then he traveled with the Navy for up until the time of Korea. Here he is on board the flagship of the 7th Fleet with the Admiral Delaney, and these are some of the China paintings. This was a wedding gift that he gave to me. It's a really beautiful watercolor. And here shows him painting on board, which is his technique. In 1950, he was commissioned to do a mural for the Jonathan Club in Los Angeles, and it is the discovery of California by Cabrillo. It is still there today, and here he is painting it, and in the foreground, on the left side, this is my nephew, who was his studio assistant, the only one in our family that had the talent to be able to paint with his granddad. I did not have that talent. And this is what the coloration looks like of the discovery of California by Cabrillo. In 1954, the Navy is getting ready to launch its first nuclear submarine, and he's commissioned to do the first painting of a nuclear submarine. This was classified at the time. This is the USS Nautilus, and Mamie Eisenhower was the person who was the sponsor of this boat. So this painting she took back to the White House, and in later years when Eisenhower left the White House, she gave it to the captain of the Nautilus, and it was on the Nautilus in the wardroom for the rest of its career. Today, the Nautilus is a museum in Groton, Connecticut, and the painting next to a photograph of Mamie Eisenhower with a bottle of champagne christening the boat next to it. So it's still quite famous. 1958, he was commissioned to go to the Arctic to be on the first expedition where a deep water vessel went from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean through the ice. Today it's not so difficult, but back then this was the very first time. It was a joint Canadian and American expedition. In this case, the Canadian ship was in the lead because it was in Canadian waters at that time. He did a whole series of Arctic paintings, and he also met Lowell Thomas when he was in the Arctic. And Lowell Thomas, he did a painting of Lowell Thomas's film crew when they were diving on the ice. And in later years, Lowell Thomas invited him to come to New York and give a lecture at the Explorers Club. He took 7 paintings with him at the invitation of Lowell Thomas and gave his speech. And one of the members there said, "Are these paintings for sale?" He said, "Yes." And he bought all 7 of them and gave them to the Explorers Club, where they are today. I gave a lecture there last year with the same 7 paintings behind me that had been behind my dad 65 years before. So that was kind of a tender moment for me. He also did expeditions to the Antarctic, and here you see him painting plein air on the ice. He has hand warmers to keep his hands from freezing. These are quite difficult paintings to do. And he also did a painting, the first painting ever at the South Pole. A whole series of Arctic and Antarctic paintings. And here is the South Pole. That's physically the South Pole. In the late 50s, we're in the Cold War, and he's still painting back to ship portraiture, which is his mainstay. And you'll see him here. He was just sketching all the time. In 1961, John Kennedy is being inaugurated as the president, and Governor Brown, the father of the recent governor, Pat Brown, came to the Army Navy Club at the Jonathan Club and said, "We need to have a gift to give to President Kennedy on his inauguration." And so they bought the painting called Speed Run. This was given to Kennedy and is now in the Kennedy Museum. And in later years, my dad did a painting of PT 109, which is more to the point. And here he is in his studio doing, you can see a partially finished painting. This is a painting of the 2 Kennedy ships, the JFK aircraft carrier and the Joseph Kennedy destroyer. And so there you see a partially finished painting, and here's the final painting. You can see the drama of it. In the 1960s, he continued to do ship portraiture. The technology is changing now, and you're getting guided missiles, and you're getting nuclear submarines. This is a painting that's in the other room. It's owned by John Gibson today, and John Gibson served on this boat. Thank you for your service, John. But I want to tell you, I know you didn't get seasick very often. After if we're getting near the bicentennial, my dad decided to go back and do sailing vessels. So he started with the existing Eagle. This is still in commission, the Coast Guard training vessel. And here's a picture of my dad on board the Eagle with the captain of the Eagle, and that's Walt Disney, who was a lifelong friend of his. Walt had wanted my dad to be one of his artists in the early days when he was taking artists from Chouinard Art Institute, but my dad wanted to stay in fine arts, but they remained friends all of their life. This is about 6 months before Walt died. He was suffering from cancer at that time. He was not well. And this is the painting that they did as a result of that visit on board the Eagle. But Beau also went back and he painted all the old War of 1812 and the Revolutionary War ships. And you have a whole series. These are watercolors, by the way, not oils. In the Navy collection, almost all the sailing ships are oil paintings. And towards the very end of his career, Admiral Leahy had always told him he could not go into a battle zone. So during World War II, all of his things, he was in Washington, or he was in his studio in Long Beach churning out his paintings. But by 1969, Admiral Leahy has left the scene, and my dad requests to go to Vietnam, and he makes a secret trip to Vietnam, and he painted a series of paintings there in 1969. So here's a escort ship off the coast of Vietnam, 1969. Here's one of the river boats. You can see they're doing inspections they were smuggling things, and that led to the last paintings he did were the latest technology that the Navy has. Here you have the nuclear squadron. This is the Enterprise, the Bainbridge, and the Long Beach. And he also was doing the nuclear submarines. So your technology went from coal-burning ships launching biplanes to the latest aircraft carriers, nuclear-powered. And that concludes the legacy of Arthur Beaumont, as I know it. What's next?
Oh. Perfect. Have a seat right there. Let me get the microphone. John, bring the mic, please. John, bring the mic, please. Well, we are happy to have our guest speaker today at the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, Geoffrey Beaumont, son of the artist, the famous naval artist, Arthur Beaumont. So Geoffrey, okay, hold on for a second. Perfect, sit there. Keep the mic with you. I'm introducing Ron Young, he's sitting here to my left. So, it's great. You have grown up, Geoffrey, your whole life, really kind of like within a close view of a famous person. What are your earliest memories of your dad? What's the earliest memory?
Well, as a 5-year-old, after my father did his Army series of plays, we were invited to go to General Patton's home in Pasadena and have dinner with General Patton. And my mother told me I was very afraid as I walked in the house, because Patton's house was a mansion, and it had a long entryway, and that entryway was filled with knights in chain mail and swords. And as a 5-year-old, that scared the hell out of me. So that triggered, that's a memory.
So, being around a famous father, what's the highest compliment you can recall hearing about your dad? What did someone say that you recall of your dad?
Well, I know what, of course, I wasn't around my dad all the time. He had so many things going on. But when the Navy gave him the Meritorious Service citation, he felt that was the greatest honor that he'd ever had in his life. And you saw the presentation that was made in the film.
So how often was he around? What was it like growing up? Was he around once a month, once a week, every other day?
In the war years, he was in Washington a great deal of the time, and I was very young. But he would come home from time to time, and it would be a great event because he was not home much at all. But that was not unusual in the war years. Most people were dislocated at that time.
Was he a tough father?
No, he really wasn't. He was he was maybe tough on my brother. I had a brother 14 years older, but by the time I came along, he took me everywhere. I mean, when I was 12 years old, I went to a dinner with him at the Army Navy Club in Washington, and my dinner partner on my right was Admiral William Leahy. Just to drop another name. On that same trip, we went to the Navy Department and we had lunch with Admiral Leahy. And Leahy never mentioned my father in his diaries, but the relationship was personal. But you can see it. He did 3 portraits of Leahy.
So did he have a studio at home, given that he usually painted on site? What was that like?
He had a studio at home, yes. He had another studio in the Pacific Coast Club in Long Beach, overlooking the harbor, where he could see the battleships or the ships in the harbor. And he had a studio at the Chevy Chase Club in Washington, where he would finish his drawings when he was working for the National Geographic.
When he was painting, how long would it take him to do a piece?
It depends on the quality that you're expected. He would do some paintings on site, and those paintings would be maybe 2 hours, and they would not have underdrawings. So he's just doing a watercolor sketch of whatever he's seeing plein air. He was very quick. When he did his studio paintings, you saw a picture of him in the studio doing the paintings of the Kennedys. He would let the paint dry between each of the different phases, so it's much more refined. And the compositions are done typically, each of the ships is done separately with sketches, and there's a composition, puts the 2 ships together. By the way, those ships never operated together. It's just for the Kennedys. They put them together. But that was another story. In any case, that painting then was probably done over 2 days. Let the paint dry between each of the layers.
So were you ever around while he was painting when you walked by as a little boy?
Oh, all the time, yes.
And so what was that like? He's painting. What would he say to you?
Well, he just worked. He didn't talk about it a lot. I mean, that was his job.
Did he want quiet?
No, we really didn't have that issue. His studio was a separate part of the house. I was allowed to go in there when I wanted to. If he was painting, he'll say, "I'll see you later, son." And then that was the word to leave the room because he's at a critical moment, but nothing more than that.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of working hours did he have?
We painted a lot at night, which is kind of unusual. But I would come down in the morning and see there'd be a new painting that's been finished there. And he had a large clientele. My sister did an interview with my dad when he was 86 years old. And at one point she asked him, "Well, Dad, how many paintings have you done in your life?" And he kind of glowered at her and he said, "I'm not an accountant." He had no idea how many paintings that he did. But in the background, we only have an audio of this. We don't have a video. And the audio is my mom. And my mom says, "Well, Beau, I paid the taxes." And she recorded every sale that he made. And from that, we can tell you that there were approximately 1,200 finished studio works. 95% were watercolors, about 5% were oils. And of that, about 1,000 of the paintings are Navy paintings.
Now, I'm going to keep asking questions, but when you have one, I want you to raise your hand, and Kathy Trafton of our committee will bring the mic to you. And so please feel free to ask questions. In the morning, you wake up in the morning, he sees you for the first time in the morning. What might he say to you, your dad? How did he refer to you?
He was very interested in my education. He would encourage me to do it diligently, go to school and work hard.
Mm-hmm. Did he like
and
you?
My mother was an educator, and she was very much of that ilk as well.
On a proud moment, what would he say? What did he like that you'd done?
What did he like? The day I was commissioned an officer in the U.S. Navy was a high point for him and for me at the same time.
Stanford undergrad, Stanford law, those are not as important as being commissioned with the Navy.
The day after I graduated as an undergraduate, I was commissioned the next day at Stanford, and that was the day that he would light it up the most.
Question from John Bechtel. John. Hold on. Kathy you'll tap it. There you go.
Just repeat the question, Ron.
Go ahead, John. Ask. I'll repeat the question.
You mentioned going lots of places with your father. What was your favorite trip or destination?
Favorite outing with your dad?
Oh, there were so many. Well, one of his favorite ship, the one he helped to raise the money to build, was the USS Los Angeles. When it was commissioned right at the end of the war, I was 9 years old. And he took me on board for the first cruise, shakedown cruise of the USS Los Angeles. And he was a superstar at that event.
Okay, so your mother's at the store. She's in line. The lady behind her says, "What does your husband do?" What would she say?
Number one, my mother would not be at the store because we had a maid who did the shopping for my mom. My mom was a senior educator and worked all the time. So
she's at the club with the ladies. One of them says,
not very often.
No?
Not very often. And our club was the Jonathan Club, and at that time, I have many memories of this, but the ladies had to go up one elevator and the men went up another elevator.
The ladies' elevator.
Yeah, that's right.
So if she met someone, another lady who didn't know her yet, and she asked your mother, "What does your husband do?" What would she have said?
She would said, "My husband is an artist." And she would leave it that simple until there were a follow-on question. It was a bit understated, and my dad was very humble about his abilities. He did not have a big ego.
So during your research for the book, and the book was, how long a project was the book?
12 years. And all my friends would come over to my place and say, "How's the book coming?" Year after year after year. Some of them are sitting at the table right here, right now.
So Tell me something you discovered about your dad that you didn't know until you were doing this research.
We have secrets.
I'm asking about
I went to England to interview my cousins in England, whom I did not know. And I found a family Bible where my grandmother had entered all the vital statistics of the family. And in 1912, there's an entry that my father married another woman. And then it's crossed out and it says marriage annulled. I did not know about that.
And we have a question from John Gibson. John.
Mr. Beaumont, did your father ever hide himself in any paintings? Was he ever on the railing of a ship or in the background of anything?
Not of the watercolors, no, not that I know of. He did watercolor portraits. I showed you a portrait that he did, a self-portrait. But he did a mural for a law firm in Los Angeles called the Dickens Characters, and he loved Dickens as a writer, and he did a mural of the participants in Pickwick Papers in front of the Inns of Court in London with St. Paul's in the background, and in all of the portraits there are family and friends. And so my father has a self-portrait, full size, in that. My two sisters are there, including Michael's mother, and Michael's my nephew, grandnephew, and also my nephew John is there, and I'm David Copperfield. So family portraits.
So what impressed your dad?
My dad was he was impressed by the traditions of the Navy, and he wanted to enhance those traditions. It's probably the most traditional service of all, and he was extremely respectful of the people that he knew in the Navy and how they had enabled him to build his career. He was very thankful.
If there was something written in a book about your dad, what would your dad have wished it would have said? He thought wouldn't say this, but what would he wish?
The two outstanding things that he recorded historically were the atomic bomb paintings, but the painting at the South Pole, I have his diaries, and he nearly died down there. He probably would have remembered that as a very challenging environment in which to do a watercolor.
And if somebody wrote something about him, what would he have wished it would have said? This man, blah, 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 what?
He would wish to be remembered by the quality of his watercolor technique and compositions. That was very important to him.
What was the surface he painted on? Canvas, board, what?
Well, all of those. He did sometimes on masonite, sometimes on Belgian linen when he's doing his murals. Wapman watercolor paper was primary, and he used Winsor & Newton paints. He was very certain to always try and get the best paints. During the war years, it was very hard to get them because they were made in England, and it was disrupted.
Our Commodore has a question. Commodore Paul Heineken, please.
Well, our closest connection to that era on the bay is when the Potomac sails by right outside our window. Was he ever on the Potomac, or did he ever paint the Potomac in his relationship with FDR?
The answer is I don't know, but I don't think so. I'm only aware that he painted 5 portraits of ships, of yachts in his whole history. The first was the portrait of the Amberjack that you saw here. He did John Ford's yacht, the Aeronair. He did John Wayne's yacht, the Wild Goose. He did Howard Hughes' yacht, which was the biggest of all, which is like a liner for those starlets. And he also did the Humphrey Bogart's yacht. Those are all the only yacht paintings I'm aware of.
Talk about your dad and money. What did he think about it? Did he care about it? What was his attitude?
He always kept his prices very reasonable because he knew that his Navy constituency had limited funds, and he would. He didn't care. My mother did the bookkeeping, but he had a pricing schedule that she kind of imposed on him. But he would make changes in that. If a lieutenant came up to him and said, "Would you do a painting for me?" He would say, "I will." He says, "I can't pay for it right away," and he would say, "Pay me when you can."
And they always did.
Dewey Hines, one of the junior members of the club.
Yeah.
Dewey only joined in
You're
1954.
talking number 2 and number
That's
3.
right. We have the second longest tenured member in the club and the third longest tenured. Yes, Dewey.
Well, thanks for the pre. I saw you had, there was a picture there of the Nautilus, and that brings a particular interesting story relative to the yacht club. My dad and his good friend Chris Jenks. Chris was a Commodore here years ago, and he had a son that became, when I knew him as a kid, he was in Annapolis. He later went on to be the navigator of the Nautilus under the ice cap on the Nautilus. So it's interesting how it's a big, small world comes back. You know.
And he was an officer on board?
He was the navigator.
The navigator, so he would have been probably a lieutenant commander or something like that.
Yeah, but not too far out of Annapolis.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe a lieutenant or JG even.
I don't know because I was a relevant little kid, but my folks were.
But he would have been having dinner in the wardroom, and the painting was in the wardroom.
Here?
The wardroom of the Nautilus.
Oh yeah, absolutely, sure. Yeah, so it was an interesting tie historically to the club.
Yeah, and not a sister ship, but there's a nuclear submarine that John Gibson served on in the next room. So be sure and take a look at that too.
So that reminds me, we have an incredibly fun gift here. John has sent up 14 paintings, which are installed right next door in the wardroom, which we ought to call the gallery room. It's so pretty. But go inside. It's wonderful. They're going to be here until the 10th. It's wonderful. It's great to have them up here. John, thank you for giving us the paintings. Wonderful. Very fun. So now you mentioned you spent 2 years being seasick when you were out in the Navy. Did your dad, who was at sea?
The operative word is in the North Atlantic.
In the North Atlantic. That would make anybody. So did your dad get seasick? What was his status that way?
My dad never got seasick, and he was not sympathetic to me when I said I got seasick.
Did he?
I got over it, by the way.
So now all these paintings in the 30s and so on, when we're really not at war, Europe is raging. Did he feel the war with Japan coming? Did he ever?
Yes. You saw in the illustrations he did for the Hearst Syndicate. Now, William Randolph Hearst himself was an isolationist, and all of his editorials were about how American boys have no place in Europe, and we are not going to get involved with this as we did in the First War. That's what's going on the editorial page. But from 1939, mid-1939 until 1941, my dad's illustrations are showing the terror of the Nazis taking over in Europe and the Japanese militarism in China. He's showing all of that on front page or second page of the newspapers. When doing my research, I went to the libraries in Los Angeles and in San Francisco, and I found the microfilms of the papers from 1939 to 1941, which were in pretty bad condition. My mother had saved all the newspapers, but the newspapers were decomposing because the paper just doesn't hold up over that many years. So I wanted to document those images, even though the quality's not good. And I found 125 ink paintings that had been published in the Hearst Syndicate of newspapers over that 2.5-year period.
Because they're laid out chronologically, you can feel that. That's why I asked the question. It feels like he can feel.
But my dad was English, and our relatives were being bombed in London. And his images are saying, you can't ignore what's happening in Europe.
Was he a dual citizen?
He was.
Dual citizen.
He had to change that to get his top secret clearance in 1942. So the answer was he had to give up his British citizenship at that time. And I was born with dual citizenship also.
What's his state of patriotism?
Total dedication.
Feels like it. When you look at the paintings. What painting did your father like the most? Do you have a sense of that?
He came to my house one time, and you might be surprised by this. I mentioned that the Chinese paintings with the Chinese junks, he gave that as a wedding gift to me. He came in one time, years later, and he walked by that painting. He says, that may be the best watercolor I ever did, because the watercolor technique is so subtle.
So It's been incredibly fun spending time talking with you again, Geoffrey. Our guest today, Geoffrey Beaumont, is the son of the United States Navy's official artist during World War II, during the greatest naval buildup in history. And you've captured in your beautiful book, which is available for inscription here right after the talk. Yeah, hand me a book, would you please, Geoffrey? I'll hold one up if you can hand me one. It's a beautiful book. It's spectacular. Geoffrey was not interested in dollars, just making a beautiful product.
It's heavy.
Yeah, and I can tell you, I have one of these at home. These are spectacular books. They're completely spectacular. How did you take the photographs? Tell us about the copy stand work to do these incredibly high-res photos.
Well, I had a very good sponsor. I gave my primary collection to the Irvine Museum in Orange County. My father passed away in Orange County, and the Irvine collection has the best collection in Southern California of California Impressionist artists, and all those artists were my dad's friends. So I gave them, they didn't have many ships in their collection, so I gave them 50 paintings, and they became the publisher of this book. So they assigned me a photographer on the East Coast and another one on the West Coast, and we went out and tried to find as many paintings as possible. Now, there are about 1,000 paintings that are out there. We found about 500, but it's still my life is a treasure hunt, because we're still discovering paintings in private collections that have been there for 3 and 4 generations. And they were the captains of the ships and the admirals, and their families just hang on to those paintings.
Well, Geoffrey, it's been wonderful having you be a guest of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Thank you so much. And with that, the luncheon is adjourned. Beautiful.